Good afternoon, morning or evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual get-together. We are happy that you joined us in such big numbers from Europe and from all over the world. My name is Jasper van Loo and I am coordinator in the Department for Vet and Skills at Cedefop. I will be your moderator today. For those of you that do not know, Cedefop is the European agency that develops evidence on vocational education and training, skills and qualifications, and supports policy in this area. On May 9th this year, the European Year of Skills started. As the European agency dealing with skills, Cedefop contributes in many ways to this important year. We do that, for example, by providing insight into what the twin digital and green transition means for countries, sectors, workers, and learners, and by promoting the ideas that skills develop best in skills ecosystems, and that breaking policy silos and partnerships makes skills policy implementation more effective. Throughout the European Year of Skills, we put our EU evidence on VET and skills on the table, and we champion skills because they ultimately power and shape a just, green and digital transition. One of the ways we do that is via virtual get-togethers. Today's get-together is the second one in the series. More will follow in the coming months, and because the European Year of Skills ends in May 2024, also next year. In today's virtual get-together, we take a closer look at a hotly debated topic, skill shortages. I'm guessing most of us are familiar with the headline statistics showing that about 7 in 10 firms face recruitment difficulties. Labor and skill shortages are a key challenge, not only for employers, but also more generally because they put a brake on digital transformation and green transition. Now, for some occupations, think for instance about STEM ones, it can be obvious that we need to increase skill supply, for example, by addressing gender inequalities. Not all shortages, however, emerge because skills are lacking. There are also shortages of quality jobs and skills use opportunities, which signal that we may need to look more at the demand side to tackle the shortages. When we design and implement policies to respond to shortages, it's important to know what drives them, what is behind them. And that is what we will be looking at today. Today's virtual get-together has 2 parts. We start with the evidence, and after that, we will have a panel discussion. As always, we have a few housekeeping rules. Let me go over them with you quickly before we start our deep dive into skill shortages. First, in case you haven't done so, please name yourself, first name, last name, and country or organization. Second, throughout the meeting, you will be muted. You can use a chat to ask questions or to ask for technical assistance. This meeting is recorded and also live streamed via Cedefop's YouTube channel. Feel free to also interact with us and others via social media. The details will be shared in the chat. So let's start with taking a look at the evidence. And saying that, I'm very happy to have with me here today Ilias Livanos, Julia Santangelo, and Konstantinos Pouliakas. We also have with us Erwin Gomez, who's joining us from Canada. Good morning, Erwin, and bonjour to you. My colleagues Ilias, Julia, and Konstantinos are experts in Cedefop's Department for Vet and Skills. Ilias leads Cedefop's skill forecast work, and Julia is part of the team working on skill surveys led by Kostas. Erwin is the manager in the Ministry of Employment and Social Development Canada, which develops and maintains the Canadian Occupational Projection System, also known as COPS. Ilias will start today and provide us with insights and recent evidence on current and future skill shortages in the EU. And just before Ilias starts, to the audience, in case you have questions during the presentations, please post them in the chat. We have some space for Q&A after the presentations. Ilias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jasper, and thank you everyone for dialing in today. I have tried to share my presentation. If you can just let me know if you cannot see. You can see it, that's excellent. So I will be talking about future skills shortages today. But before I start my presentation and get into the data, as you said, Jasper, I would like to talk a bit about terminology used for skill shortages, or as I call it here, skills shortageology. And here we can see a cloud presenting various terms often found in the literature around shortages. Now, in the eyes of the experts, they all look into something different, but when it comes to a layperson, then it all comes down to one thing, and this is some sort of failure of the firm or the organization or the economy in general to find the talent is looking for. Either we talk about education, competencies, knowledge, or however you would like to define skills. And sometimes we even talk about the feelings of employees not having the essential skills to do their job. Let us now move on to some theoretical considerations around skill shortages. To start with the standard economic theory, we see that a shortage should not exist for a long time, as the wage should act as a clearing device, soon bringing an equilibrium. So in other words, a shortage sends a message to the firm to increase the wage, and the supplier receives this message, so people get the education needed, and very soon the shortage doesn't exist anymore. But things are a bit more complicated than that. First of all, the supply, at least in the short term, is inelastic, which means that the shortage will actually create unfilled vacancies for some time. But even if the supply becomes elastic in the end, then there is no guarantee that wages will immediately adjust, and this may mean that there will be certain level of unused labor or unemployment until the wage brings an equilibrium again. But there is more. Indeed, there are all sorts of labor market imperfections and frictions that allow vacancies and unemployment to exist at the same time, as suggested by the Beveridge curve. And things complicate even further when we investigate the role of institutions such as educational providers, trade unions, and so on, for both supply and demand. And after their inefficiencies bring about shortages. Then, even at the firm level, there are reasons why these may not offer the clearing wage, but they prefer to offer a higher or even a lower wage than the market price. And I will give you an example. In a presentation I attended a couple of weeks ago, somebody from IBM was saying that they would give the same wage to all their employees, even the cleaners and the makeup artists, just because they want them to feel a part of the team. But at the same time, as suggested by the insider-outsider theory, the firms may not want to increase the wage to give to an outsider just to secure the privileges of those already working for them. And finally, there is also a number of non-economic reasons, such as labor mobility, that indeed allow shortages to exist. So having reviewed the literature, one could argue that shortages are actually theoretical constructs that in practice is difficult to capture and even more difficult to solve. And having discussed all this, a question that pops up is, how do we measure skill shortages? And here is a list of quotes I have gathered through the years I've been studying skill shortages. So the first one is from a very well-known UK economist, labor economist, Derek Bosworth, who in his book, he wrote that skill shortages are notoriously difficult task to measure. OECD in a report said that labor shortages are not easy to measure, and the US Bureau of Labor Statistics notes that no single empirical measure of occupational shortages exists, nor does it appear that one can easily be developed. And because some of you may be thinking that these citations are ancient, I also dare to ask ChatGPT what it thinks and how easy it is to measure skill shortages. And the answer I got is that accurately measuring skill shortages can be challenging due to various factors, including data limitations, labor market dynamics, and the subjective nature of skill assessments. Nevertheless, there is a lot of work in the area of measuring skill shortages. And this slide shows that other than various definitions, there are also very many different ways to measure shortages. And indeed, Cedefop is involved in many of these. So we see that we have employers surveys where employers are asked whether they see a shortage in their sector and what they do about it, or employee surveys where they ask employees whether they feel that their skills do not match the demands of their job. There are vacancy data that are being analyzed, and nowadays at Cedefop we have online vacancy data that we can look what the demand is calling for. But there are also case studies, other sectoral case studies or occupational case studies. In many countries, they even use immigration data to inform policies on skill shortages. A number of cases, we look at different indicators. For example, we look at trends of employment, unemployment, and wage, and then we say that there should be a shortage for this particular occupation, depending on the movement of these indicators. And of course, there are the forecasts of demand that at Cedefop we also engage in. So now getting into the evidence, Jasper, and getting to Cedefop's work and the future skill shortage indicator, let me start by saying that this is a brand new indicator that we have elaborated originally for the purposes of a flagship EU report, namely the Economic and Social Developments report, but it will also feature in our own forthcoming flagship report called Skills in Transitions. In essence, what the indicator does is to summarize the results from the skills forecast with a single measurement. And as you see, it has three pillars. The first pillar is the demand, and this is the jobs to be created due to expansion of the economy, the sector, or the occupation itself. The second is jobs coming from the supply side, and specifically due to the need to replace existing workers due to reasons such as retirement, occupational mobility, bad health, and others. And this component is very important to consider when talking about future skill shortages, as we know that almost 9 out of 10 job openings in the future will occur due to the need to replace existing workers. And third, there is an imbalance indicator measuring whether the future workforce will have the right education for the jobs in demand. If you like, this is where future demand will meet supply, captured by this indicator. Now, on the right, there are some details about the elaboration of this indicator, which is important in the sense that any change made in this could actually and potentially change the results. Very quickly, the score ranges from 1 to 4, with 4 denoting strong shortage and 1 no shortage or very small shortage. We apply equal weights in the 3 pillars, and at the end, we average using a simple arithmetic average approach. And a couple more points is that we estimate the indicator by grouping occupations by skill level. And once we are done, we extend the analysis to sectors by looking at the shortage of occupations that are dominant within the sector, deriving thus the measurement about the sector. Now, let's get into the results. So the first group shown here refers to highly skilled non-manual occupations, in other words, to managers, professionals, and associate professionals. I'm not listing all occupations, just a selection to trigger some interesting findings. As you can see, they're listed by shortage intensity. Also within each bar, you can see the score for demand, supply, and imbalance. On the left, we see some key points which may not be obvious just by looking at the overall score. The first point is that some shortages are likely to come because of the twin transitions, as for information and communication and science and engineering. There will be shortages due to the increased demand. And indeed, if we look at the demand component, we see that a strong shortage is coming for both occupations. But now, if you're thinking why the score for IT is not as high in terms of the overall indicator, this is simply because there will be low replacement needs. Maybe the sector is too young, and the supply is also likely to serve the demand in the future. The second point is that some occupations may experience shortages due to replacement needs, like managers and health professionals, and this needs to be taken carefully into consideration, as such jobs are not easy to replace, so it has to be designed in time. The third point comes from balances. in general, we see that the future workforce will be equipped with high skills, which is a positive message when we discuss professionals, but starts to change as the skill requirement for occupations goes down. For example, even though there will be no imbalance for health professionals, there would be quite a strong imbalance for health associate professionals. And this could actually mean that a trained health professional is working at a job below his or her educational level. And there could be various reasons why this is happening, as typically we all know that doctors are in shortage everywhere. One possible explanation is that the nature of tasks for both professionals and associate professionals has expanded, so actually a doctor could be a good fit for a nurse, or an engineer can be a good fit for a technician. Another explanation could be that the content of some highly skilled occupations is not appealing, like pay, working conditions, level of responsibility, so such people decide to work on the same field but from a different post. Moving on to skilled non-manual occupations, the first observation to make is that technology will have an impact on these occupations. So, for example, numerical and material recording clerks will experience very low or no shortage, and this comes as no surprise as the context of their work becomes very quickly obsolete and the tasks can easily be taken over by somebody else. And indeed, the score for replacement could actually turn out to be lower than the one we saw here, meaning that there is a low need to actually replace retiring workers. But when it comes to jobs that personal skills are needed, then we may face a shortage in the future. For example, like personal and sales workers, as their context of work requires skills often different to those obtained by formal education, which means that we cannot easily substitute these professionals, these occupations, by just hiring somebody more educated. And indeed, we see that strong replacement needs for these occupations will occur in the future. And these observations more or less hold also for skilled manual occupations like building trades or plant operators, who again cannot be replaced that easily due to the specificity of their work and the need for specialized knowledge. Finally, when we look at elementary occupations, it appears that the shortage will be very strong, but there is another question about whether it will be a skill shortage and how difficult will it be to tackle it. For sure, we'll need large numbers of cleaners or food preparation assistants, but it may not be as difficult to tackle these as, for instance, it will be the case for science or engineering professionals. Yes, it is not an issue that it should be overlooked, as we know that these are very important for the economy overall. And now, finally, this is a list of occupations, which, as I mentioned in the beginning, is elaborated by looking at the occupational structure within a sector and the shortage, based on the shortage intensity of occupation. So maybe a couple of examples. We see that IT is one of the sectors that is having one of the smallest numbers in terms of the skill shortage indicator. But as I already explained before, this is because it is a relatively young sector, so there are low replacement needs. And also we anticipate that the future demand will meet the needs of the supply. And on bottom, you can see maybe that mining will have very small shortages because of the green transition. We need less of these workers. And towards the bottom, we see, for instance, that activities of household as employers, they will face a shortage. Also accommodation and food service activities. So as you see, there are activities of sectors that the personal element is quite important, and we need to think carefully about them. But I think this is about my presentation, Jasper, so I would like now to pass on the floor to our colleague Giulia Sant'Angelo, who will take us through an even deeper dive into which are the drivers for the skill shortages. So Giulia, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks a lot for for joining in. Thank you so much, Ilya, for your exhaustive presentation. I will now try to give you a brief overview of the main drivers of the recruitment difficulties observed in Europe. And for this, I will base on various Cedefop work and analysis that we have been performing recently together with my colleagues, Konstantinos Pouliakas and Giovanni Russo. So as Ilias explained, defining skill shortages is rather complex. But if we want to focus on one specific aspect, such as the recruitment difficulties faced by firms, we can refer to the evidence provided by the European Company Survey performed by Eurofound and Cedefop together. In this survey, we can see that more than 70% of EU firms experience difficulties in finding employees with the right level of skills, and for 1/4 of firms, these difficulties are high. Now, the assessment of the incidence and causes of skill shortages are sometimes conflicting, but there are some main elements that normally emerge as a relevant aspect, and these are training issues and, even more importantly, retention issues. So as you can see, for instance, from the numbers in the table, retention and turnover difficulties are the most important element in explaining skill shortages, especially for those firms which face high difficulties, meaning major obstacles. And these retention issues normally entail also poor hiring and managerial practices. Next. Now, how can we define shortage occupations? Why are some occupations in shortage and some other are not? Also, this one is a multifaceted issue. And to address this question, we use the detailed list of occupations in shortage provided by the European Labour Authority in 2021, which is based on administrative data from the public employment services. This list includes the occupation most often in shortage or with high level of shortages. This is referred to the current period, and in this respect, this list differs from the forecast of shortages that Ilias just provided. So we merge this list with the second wave of the European Skills and Jobs Survey, which covers almost 50,000 employees from all EU member states and collects information about the task performed by workers and the skills used to perform this. In terms of skill, it specifically measures the intensity of foundation, meaning literacy and numeracy, physical, interpersonal, digital, and problem-solving skills. This survey is a valuable source to study this issue of shortages, also because it provides detailed information about job quality, meaning job satisfaction, wages, but also job characteristics such as job complexity and routinization, to measure the autonomy that employees can exert at work, but also to what extent their tasks are repetitive. So comparing the job skill requirements of shortage and non-shortage occupation, we find that individuals working in shortage occupations are more likely to need lower literacy, numeracy, and digital skills. By contrast, such jobs depend more on physical, manual, and interpersonal skills. And this is evident already from the chart that you can see here. But we did perform additional analysis in order to focus on comparable jobs with the same level of skills in order to distinguish between highly skilled, semi-skilled, manual, and elementary occupations. So with this categorization, we find that even if in shortage occupations the average skills need are lower, the complexity required in this job is higher. This means that employees in shortage occupations are expected to exercise greater discretion in organizing and planning their work, in learning, in adapting to unexpected situations. Jobs in shortage occupation also perform routine tasks less frequently. So this is more in terms of the expectations of the employers regarding the task that employees have to perform. So with this grouping of occupations, we see that the drivers of shortages are very much diversified across occupations. This is a list of issues that emerge. For instance, there is a matter of attraction because, especially in manual occupations, females are not attracted because this type of occupation mainly depend on male workers. We also see retention issues because turnover and retention difficulties are particularly evident in semi-skilled occupation, which indeed comprise mainly young employees with low tenure. In terms of working conditions, we see that some skilled occupations, such as the health professionals and the elementary jobs, experience generally low pay and low satisfaction. Digital skills requirements are particularly high, especially in digital occupations. We also find evidence for mobility issues, meaning that it is difficult to find manual workers, such as, for instance, drivers, because of geographical barriers. And we also performed the analysis at a higher level of granularity, for instance, to focus on some occupations as the care workers in health service, because we know, as Ilya also showed, that these are and will be in shortage. And also in this case, we see that there is a high variety of job profiles also within a specific category. So this is an additional evidence just to conclude that given the high variety and given also the diversified reasons behind the shortages, what we need is different policy responses to address the different issues underlying the shortage occupations. And with this, I leave the floor to you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Ilyas and Julia, for the insightful presentation. So a clear message from that, from the thing that you said last, is that we see many different reasons for shortages alongside, what we typically think of, which is skills. I think, and you clearly showed that, with the right surveys, with the right evidence and techniques, you can understand better what is actually driving why we see a shortage. I see a question in the chat, and I think it's a question that Ilyas could probably answer. What is the time dimension of future shortages? You talk about future shortages, also this future indicator. Can we, and a related question is, can we distinguish between different futures? I mean, the short-term future, the medium short-term future, and the long-term future. Could you maybe reflect a little bit on that? Thank
you, Jasper, and thanks to the question. Well, the future shortage indicator, it is powered by the skills forecast, which provides estimations of future employment trends to 2035. So typically the horizon that we consider when we produce the skills forecast is 15 years. And this has been used, this time horizon has been used in order to derive the indicator. Of course, technically it is possible to, as you say, to look at the short term and then follow with looking at the medium term. Thank you.
And maybe a question from me. Beyond the forecast, the other work that's being done to reflect on shortages. I mean, when you think, for instance, about looking at online job ads, I mean, we try to also combine what is the picture. Do you see, that the short-term shortages are the same as the long-term shortages, or maybe not?
So it depends is the answer. The overall trend, I would say that it is quite common, and indeed for the forthcoming publication, we do try to compare the long term, which is the forecast, with what comes now, which is from the skills of aid, which is the online job vacancies data, and indeed we see that the trends they're actually confirmed at what is happening now, with maybe a couple of variations.
Thanks very much. I think that is great. And that report that Ilias mentioned, it's coming up in, let's hope, a couple of weeks. We have a lot of new evidence, and I think it's something to look out for. Of course, on social media, we'll report it as soon as it's out. It's not too much of a read. It's about 60 pages, so it's a cool and to the point summary of where things are going. Okay, so I think we're ready to go to our third speaker, who is Erwin Gomez. Erwin is from Canada. Actually, we also talked to Erwin a few days ago when Cedefop attended a seminar on shortages and labor market change in Canada. So we're actually quite close. The ocean in the middle doesn't prevent us from working quite closely together. Erwin will speak about the Canadian COPS system, which makes it already sound quite serious. It's COPS, so you have to listen to it. And that system makes it possible to track skill shortages in Canada. He will explain a little bit about the details, what their approaches are, and what they can learn from that. So, Erwin, thank you very much for being with us, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Jasper, for giving me the floor, and thank you. I want to start by thanking Cedefop for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a real pleasure to show to other countries and to Europe what Canada has been doing with respect to labor shortages in Canada. So I'm going to share the screen right now. Hope everybody sees my screen. Okay. So here we go. So here is a little bit of the structure that of the presentation I'm gonna be giving you today. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my organization. I cannot just go and start talking about shortages without telling you where I come from and what we do. I'm gonna tell you about the labor market information system in Canada, because it's not only us who does this type of work in Canada. There's a lot of agents that do this in Canada. And finally, I will talk more specifically about what my team does, which is the development of COPS. Okay, I'm going to show you some results, a little bit of the methodology, and how COPS is used, and some of the challenges that we face. Some of the things that you will see are very common with the presentation that you guys just made. So you will see some commonalities in there. We'll see if this allows for a little bit of comparison, but the idea is to just show how we do things here. So about my ministry, Employment, Social and Development Canada is a federal ministry that basically works to improve the standards of living and quality of life of all Canadians. So it's the second largest ministry in Canada. We have over 30,000 people employed, and we basically are responsible to provide all sorts of services to Canadians. So all Canadians, or every single Canadian, will go through us for whatever reason. We go from issuing the employment insurance number, which is needed for many services, all the way to providing the pension plan. So we have a lot of services, including employment insurance, job search, training, student loans, the temporary foreign program policies, the benefits for the disability, so a lot of social benefits, family benefits, and among others. Okay, part of in order to develop these programs, we also have other tools that we need to develop, and part of that is the labor market information to help employment insurance, to help developing all the programs and policies that are related to employment, as for example the youth employment policy. So this is where we come into place, and that's how we fit within the organization. However, we are not the only ones who do we provide this type of information. So this slide just showed you a little bit of how the labor market information system works in Canada. We are the federal part only. At the federal level, ESDC is responsible for developing COPS, which I'm gonna tell you in about in a little bit. But we also do the 3-year outlook. The 3-year outlook is basically projections at the occupational level, at the regional level for Canada, which provides information to job seekers on the whereabouts of the job. So it's not about shortages or surpluses, but rather where the jobs will be and the likelihood of finding a job in a particular region in Canada at the occupational level. We work along together because this is not my team, it's a different team, but we work along together because we use the same fundamentals, the same everything, and our interaction is quite tight. We're very close teams. We make sure basically that what we provide is consistent throughout. Provinces also have their own tools, but they have it in different ways, okay? I imagine there are similarities here in the interaction between the provinces and the federal government, as you guys have in Europe, in the way that although the federal government does a labor market information that is across Canada, provinces do their own thing, and they have different tools and provide different products that are not really necessarily standardized throughout the provinces. So some provinces are able to provide projections, very detailed projections, while others cannot, for different reasons, either because the data is too small or because they lack resources or they lack capacity, because most of the cases is because it's too small to provide quality information. So basically some provinces have not a lot of people, the sample sizes are small, etc. And finally, we have the sector councils. These are specialized organizations that concentrate on providing labor market information for specific sectors, for the ICT, for the construction industry, etc. And they're very more specialized. So although we try to provide detailed data, they really concentrate on labor requirement type of labor market information. So what is COPS? So more about us. COPS is a suite of models that we developed, that the idea is to make projections of labor demand and labor supply on the trends of labor demand and supply, with the idea of identifying shortages that could happen over the long term. And this long term is 10 years. It works as an early indicator of these shortages that could happen, okay? If agents react to the information that we provide, these shortages are not supposed to happen. So this is just an early indicator that helps developing policies and programs. Some information that we can provide is which occupations will have the strongest employment growth, which one will face the strongest pressures from retirements, what kind of educations it will be needed to join these occupations, where are the labor market entrants coming from, the school system or immigration. We do this at the national level, and we do it for all the occupations in Canada. So this is a little bit of the structure. The COPS works in two main steps. We start with the recent conditions, and the idea is to start with a starting point, okay? So we try to make an analysis of what is happening right now and identify the occupations that are currently facing shortages or surpluses, and then we use the projections to see if these shortages will be long-lasting, if they will stay with us for the long run, if some of them will clear, or if new ones that were not in shortage currently will appear. So I'm going to go over these two steps really quickly. In the first step, there are 3 mini steps. Well, they are really big steps, but in the first step, there's 3 sub-steps. In the first one is the analysis of many indicators. We gathered 20 to 30 indicators from different surveys at as much detail level that we can. Okay, we use multiple measurements such as employment growth and employment rate, wage growth, and I'm going to show you some graphs. Not that I'm going to go in the details of the graph, but just to show you how we do the analysis. For this part, we don't use a model. We don't believe that there is a powerful method to analyze the recent condition, in the sense that there is not a plug and play model. Why? Because as Elias already explained, the labor market agents react in different ways depending on the occupations, depending on what is happening in the market. For example, we will expect that if the labor market is tight, wages will go up, but wages go up in a lag way. We don't see that evidence immediately. Also, how the wage is calculated does not allow us to sometimes see the growth. Sometimes the wage actually declines because we calculate in an average wage. So if you hire more, they typically have lower wages, which decreases the average wage. Same goes with other indicators. Employment, if it's too tight, then therefore you won't have people to hire. So employment, instead of growing, might actually decline. The unemployment rate, if it's too low, it cannot decline any further. So it's already low, so you cannot see further declines, etc. In addition to that, we also need to consider that each occupation is different. And these economic indicators are different for each occupation. For example, a typical example that I give is the unemployment rate between doctors and construction trades. For the doctors in Canada, is usually around 1% or nothing. Okay, it's very low. If it goes up to 5%, I would be very worried that they are going into more surplus side with more, that we will be having unemployed doctors. For the construction trades, the unemployment rate is really about 10%, 11%. If they drop to 5%, it's a big indicator that they're going into shortage situation. So the 5% for these two occupations does not mean the same. So we really need to understand the occupations in order to interpret well the data. We also do overall consultations for this part of the process. Overall consultation just to get an idea of what is happening in the labor market, and detailed consultation. So this is when we send the results to all our regional economies that validate our results. So this is a little bit of the data that we show. The idea is to get a story of what is happening. What is happening in the occupational level, looking at many indicators. So here, for example, you can see, okay, employment is growing, the unemployment rate is declining, the percentage of workers doing overtime is increasing, is above the average, is above its historical average, above the average of the all occupations. We also take a look at the job vacancies, for example, at the job vacancies increasing dramatically, how many unemployed we have to fill those vacancies. So if this is below 1, it means that we have less unemployed that number of vacancies, so they will never be filled anyways. So we take a look at a lot of these different variables to make sure that our story makes sense. And that if one indicator is not behaving the way we expect it to behave, then we can have others that will help us understand the picture. And these are the final results of that first step. Last year, we found that we had 58 occupations out of the 293 occupations, the occupational groupings that we analyzed, were facing shortage conditions. Of these 58, 20 were of frictional characteristics, meaning that they were likely as a result of the reopening of the economy, and they will likely clear in the short term. This was to be tested with the projections, with our models. We found 7 that were in surplus. I'm not going to go over all the details because in the interest of time, I think I need to move on. So once we get into the second part, the second big step is the projections, okay? In the projections, this is the quick structure of our modeling. I'm not going to go over all the details, but rather to explain the big blocks. Basically, we have a macroeconomic, demographic, and industrial projection that dictate really what's happening all the way to the top, from the top to the bottom. It dictates all our demographics, which drill down all the way to the occupations. This allows us to get projections for employment growth and labor force growth. Then the first thing that we do is make a projections of the job openings on the demand side. And job openings can be as a result of employment growth, so how many jobs we're gonna have, how many additional jobs will be created, but also they need to replace certain workers. So we're gonna there will be a demand for replacing workers that will be retiring, emigrating, or dying. On the supply side, we have what we call job seekers. These are in our modeling system. We have the main source of job seekers are school leavers, so people joining the school system and exiting it to joining the labor market. Immigrants, because Canada is largely depending on immigrants. Some re-entrants of the labor market and the student labor market. Finally, we have net occupational mobility, which plays a role. We put it on the supply side, but really a little bit of both, because when it's negative, it's more on the demand side. Once we have the job seekers and job openings, we compare them and we join these results with the conditions, with the assessment in the first step, the recent labor market conditions, to understand if the shortages that we have found in the first step will be long-lasting, and if we will have find shortages over the long run, if they will continue or they will disappear. So here are some of the results of our modeling, some mega trends. First, Canada is aging. I don't think this is something that is a mystery for anybody. It's actually quite similar in Europe, I imagine. The population in Canada is aging, and all baby boomers will surpass their typical retirement age of 65 years old by the end of our projection period, so by 2030. Immigration is a big, important assumption for us. We, as I said, Canada largely depends on the immigration volume. In the 2010s, we used to have between 250 to 325,000 new immigrants every year. The federal government has increased this target to reach about 450,000, which is why we put in our modeling. And more recently, they increased that target to 500,000, so 500,000 every year. So that's a big jump in our immigration target. It's almost double. There are some trends that impact our projections. So the automation is one. It impacts it because we make projections of productivity at the industrial level. So that impacts the employment growth. But also we reallocate occupations by industry. So these allocations are also playing an important role on how automation is playing an important role of how these occupations are allocated in these industries. Finally, we also consider the green transition that Canada is going through. Canada has the emission reduction plan, which the idea is to reduce emissions to 40% of the levels that we're seeing in 2005 by 2030. So here are some of the results. This is on the demand side, the job openings by the usual educational requirement. What we can see here is that about 2/3 of the demand of the future projected job openings will be in occupations that will require at least post-secondary education or management. The way that we do things allow us to disaggregate everything by components. So we can have this by occupation, but in each occupation, we can also have how many are due to the job employment growth, how many are due to retirements and other replacement demand. On the supply side, we get a similar picture. The only difference, well, about 2/3 as well will be of the job seekers will be in occupations that require post-secondary education. The main message here is that the blue bars or turquoise bars there are the school leavers, which are the main source of labor supply in Canada. And for management, the main source really is mobility, which you can see there's some negative mobility, especially in university, high school, and on the job training, which all feed the management stream. Here are some of the final results of once we do all the projections. In the end, we found that 56 occupations will be in shortage conditions over the long term. So if you go back to the previous slide when we summarized, we had 38 and 20 that were frictional. So of the 38 that we believe were structural, we jumped to 56 basically. So some of the 20 that were frictional will turn into structural shortages in the end. Some will clear, but some will become more structural, and we expect to have 56 structural shortages over the long term. From the surpluses, we expect to have about 8 occupations that will be in surplus. From the shortage occupations, a large number are related to health occupations, mostly because Canada is aging. 14 of these occupations are related to natural and applied sciences. Most of them are ICT engineers type of occupation. Nine of them are related to construction trades. In our modeling, we consider that a lot of the construction trades will be occupied or will be a strong demand for construction because there is this transformation to transform all the plants, all the manufacturing plants, etc., that will to make them more green. We have some occupations in agriculture and in manufacturing. On the surplus side, most of them really are in business and finance and business administration, but this is really more about data entry. So as Elias said, more occupations that will be impacted by the technology and the automation. And we have some, there are very few, so there's no need to go over all of them, but there are 2 in sales and services and 1 in art, culture, and recreation. So here is just a show on the skills. This slide shows you a list of all the skills in which the occupations shortage had the largest difference with those occupations in surplus. So you can see that occupations, the list of occupations in shortage had a higher proportion of science skills, operation skills, and troubleshooting when you compare them in surplus. So this is just another way to cut our projections. I don't want to go into the details because it's just to show the kind of information that we can provide. So how is the information used? I have 1 or 2 more slides only. Our information is used really for job seekers. This is how it is developed. It's really developed as a labor market information product for the Canadians. So we publish it, and job seekers look at our information to see if they want to make a decision about their careers, etc. But it is also used for policy development. So our immigration ministry uses it for the maintenance, further developing of their immigration policies. That's one way. Our own ministry uses it for the refining of the temporary foreign worker program. We accept a lot of temporary foreign workers, and they try to make sure that they go into where they are needed, and so that they don't disrupt the Canadian labor market. It's also used for the development of employment, the youth employment policies, for the negotiations in international trade negotiations, and for the development of foreign credential recognition programs. So this is just some examples that we are using, but it is even used for, we've been getting requests also from correctional services, for example. We face a lot of challenges, okay? First of all, it's an extremely hard work, as Elias already explained. We face the same difficulties. Everybody asks us for gaps, specific numbers. That doesn't exist. It's very hard to provide. Despite the fact that we do have a lot of data, we still face the issue of having a small sample size for what is demanded. So as people continue asking very detailed information, and we cannot provide as much detail as everybody wants, because it's too hard based on the data that we have. And this applies when we talk about occupations, not only the sample data, but also how the occupations are defined. There is also a lack of understanding around people of what this can do, our modeling, what they can do, and what shortages mean. For the employers, it means that they want to, when they want to hire, they want to have the person next day. For job seekers, it's not like that. So for a lot of people, shortages mean something different, and so we cannot always fit their definition of what a shortage is. Finally, there is a lack of consensus. Some people that have different opinions of what the immigration numbers should be, for example. There's no historical data for some components, so we cannot verify some of our own estimates, because they're estimated also backcasting. And finally, what we do is really at the national level. So we do hide, we don't show that there are imbalances that happen in very specific regions and very specific provinces for very specific job titles. So that concludes my presentation. So thank you so much. For any further information, you feel free to fire me an email. That's our website, and that's my email address.
Yeah, thank you very much, Erwin. Merci. I think it was a fascinating presentation, also showing, some of the challenges you face, but also I think clearly showing to us that when you work at national level, you can also use that to use more sources, which is sometimes for us more difficult because we have to work with harmonized data. So I think also great learning opportunities and for sure we should stay, connected and talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. I look forward to this cooperation.
Very good. We have a couple of questions which came in just when I was introducing you, which are still for the previous presentation. So if you don't mind, we go to those first. The first one is about two sources of labor market information. The first one is the long-term forecast, and then information that's based on online job advertisements, which is a Cedefop Skills of 8. It's a tool that we have on our website. The question is, how can you square the evidence? And I think it's a question that Elias could possibly reflect on.
So thank you for the question. As I mentioned in one of the slides, there are different ways to receive labor market information, turn it into intelligence, and then see what are the implications. And what we do at Cedefop, we try to triangulate the data. So we have different sources, we have different, based on different research methods, different horizons. But what happens is that we gather all this data, then we look at it together and we try to draw some solid conclusion. Jasper, you already mentioned about the forthcoming Skills in Transition publication, where is the forum where we do exactly what this question is about, triangulating the data.
Mm-hmm. And then actually also occupations is actually, a way to connect both sources, wouldn't you say?
always you need some common lenses, let's say, some common doors. So you can see the data by opening the door of occupations where we have a common classification. You can do it from the side of the sector. You look at the sector using, again, the common classification, or you can do it at the country level and then look at everything. So always you need something that connects the evidence, either this being occupations, sectors, or countries.
Another second question, and that's also for Elias, I think, is does the model take into account the occupations mobility and the migration? Now we saw that Erwin really explained, how this works for Canada, but how do we deal with mobility and migration in the European skills forecast? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, I can say a couple of things. So implicitly, yes, let me say that the skills forecast, it is using the demographic projections produced by Eurostat. So this is Europop, and this has solid assumptions about migration and population trends. So we take this as a given and we consider that this is the most likely to happen scenario. On the side, we could run our own separate scenarios, so as a policy evaluation tool, to see what would happen if, for example, migration suddenly arises, what will be the implications for skills and jobs. And regarding the occupations, then we look at the labor force survey data, we look at the structures of occupations and how these change. So we're monitoring what is happening indeed. And even though in Canada, when it comes to replacement demand, they break down all the reasons, which could be mobility, it could be retirement from the labor market, it could be health. In Europe, we consider and we capture everything, and we call it replacement demand. So we don't break down at the moment the components, but we capture all of these aspects.
Okay, I also got a question for all three speakers, which is about the role of trade union in being a valuable source of information regarding skills shortages. Maybe I could start with Canada.
Thank you. So the trade, yes, you're right. I have to say that in my understanding is that the union coverage in Canada is lower than in Europe. If that's my general understanding, I'm not so sure, but that's my understanding. But we do rely on some of their data. COPS specifically does not, because we have data that covers it in a standardized way all the materials, but the sector councils in their work, they have board members and they have committees that include stakeholders from the industry, and they, in principle, they include as many labor market agents in their committees, which will be contractors on the employer side, and it will include the trade unions, and they tend to feed the labor market information systems and their particular information system. The problem is that some unions the coverage in the unions is high in some occupations, but very limited in others, right? So in the construction trades, for example, is relatively high, but in others, I don't know, like IT workers, for example, there is I'm not going to say nothing because I'm not so sure, but I'm pretty sure it's very low. So the union coverage is not standardized through all the occupations, and therefore it depends on what data we look at.
Okay, for Europe, Elias, maybe you could reflect a little.
Yes, I would say that providing the data is one thing. What is important is what do you make out of the data. And in order to be in a position to make the most out of the data, you actually need to get together. The results show nothing. It's the knowledge that you get from the data that makes a good decision. And in fact, if you can wait a couple more minutes, you'll see that in the panel, we do have the stakeholders on board that they will provide their own insights. And this is, I think, the message that we want to pass, that we need to get together and understand what the data are saying. As Plato was saying, a good decision, it is not based on numbers, but knowledge.
Okay, strong statement. Maybe I have one more question, but it's a little bit out of my own curiosity to Erwin. Are you using real-time data from job boards like we are doing at Cedefop? And if so, how do you use it?
We have used it. and we don't at the moment. Well, we do and we don't. And that's the real question. So part of our work is not only the projections, but it's also to monitor what is happening in the economy. Okay. In the past, we did, like going back 7-8 years ago, we didn't have the job vacancy data that we have right now. The job vacancy started in 2015, but we didn't back then. So back then we tried to use more the online job boardings. They were becoming more popular, and we made an assessment to use them to get detailed data at the occupational level. So my team assessed this, and we found that there were a lot of errors in the coding of the occupations and in the coding of the industries, and there were a lot of duplication, which led to explosion in the online job boardings. And so we concluded that it was not a good data set to monitor employment demand growth, so labor demand growth. However, we do use it for certain elements in comps. For example, I didn't show this, but we made analysis of the task compositions by in the occupations, which allows us to analyze more the impact of automation on the occupations. This is done using online job boards. We do have Job Bank, which is our own ESDC online job postings. And based on that data set, we made analysis of the composition of tasks by occupation, which allow us to provide info into the modeling. So this is why I say yes and no. Like, we use it for analytical purposes, not necessarily to monitor, because we do have other data that allow us to track labor demand more accurately, and that would be the job vacancies.
Thanks very much. I think is an interesting parallel, because we work a lot with online data now for a couple of years, and we also see, a main contribution of that type of data is that it allows you to reflect more on actual skills. I mean, that's really right. What is unique about that data. So, I mean, that you can leverage in combination with other sources, because not a single source often is what gives you the answer. It's often what by combining that, really understand what's happening. And that's
right. And now I answer for myself, by the way, but there are other organizations who do use it. Okay, I wanted to clarify that. I'm answering for my team, but there is a sector councils, and there is one specific council who they do use it, but yes, we use it also for the skills.
Very good. Thanks a lot. I would like to thank again the three of you, and also Kostas, who was there, for the interesting presentations. It's 5 o'clock in Greece now, depending on where you are. It's also the top of the hour. So it's now time that we reflect a little bit on the findings, on what we've heard, how we should interpret what we've heard, and what that means for policy. And that we will do in a virtual panel. You will see them coming up on the screen very shortly. In this virtual panel, we have Terence Hogarth, who is professor at the University of Warwick Institute for Employment Research. We have Ben Kriegel, who is a managing partner of economics. And those two first panelists will look at things more from the research side. So I will first have a few questions for them. Then we will turn to Sylvain Renouvelle and Tuscany Bell to see how they view shortages in the care sector, which is a sector where shortages, as we have already seen, are a big concern. Sylvain is the director at the Federation of European Social Employers, and Tuscany is policy coordinator for social services and youth at the European Federation of Public Service Unions. So first of all, welcome to you all, and thanks very much for joining us. So I would like to start with Terence. You have been researching skill mismatches and shortages for a long time, and we've actually cooperated also for many years about those kind of issues. We have seen, not only today, but also from other research, that it can be quite challenging to make a measure of shortages based on surveys and translate that into policy or into policy implementation. And it's difficult to do that because it's often challenging to know what's behind the shortages that we see. Now, based on your experience in research, why is that so difficult? And what could we perhaps do about it?
Thank you, Jasper, for your very difficult question to answer. I shall I shall do my best, and thank you for the invitation to join your panel. Well, let's assume we can identify a skill shortage, and as the discussion previously pointed out, this is not easy. And I think Ben will talk about this more in the next discussion. But let's assume we can identify an occupation or a job that is a skill shortage one where we think an increase in skills supply will have some impact on filling unmet demand. Then it strikes me that there are at least two important issues that we need to address. First is from the demand side. I think we need to be clear about what are the specific skills which are in short supply. We might know, for example, that there are shortages for, say, electrical engineers or people working in STEM occupations more generally. But what are the specific skills which applicants for a job, for example, for electrical engineer lack? Is it technical skills? If so, which ones? Or is it something else? Or is it a combination of various skills? And I'm not sure we have definitive information about this. The survey evidence is very instructive. And I'm thinking particularly of the European Skills and Jobs Survey here, which I think is a tremendous resource. But we want information at a detailed level, and there are limits to what you can reasonably expect with respect to the level of disaggregation from a survey. And ideally, we want information about a job, not groups of jobs that are combined in an occupational group. And I think when we sort of try to identify that detailed information, there's lots of indicative information from case studies and there's lots of anecdotal evidence, but there's not much that is definitive and gives us the degree of detail required. And the second point, which I think is important, is we need a supply side perspective as well. We concentrate on the demand side, but it's the supply side where policy is often focused. And I think it's a reasonable question to ask whether or not we actually have a firm handle on why skill systems fail to produce the skills or combinations of skills in sufficient volume. I don't think we fully understand the supply side, but I think things are getting better. I mean, that's apparent from the presentations you've had earlier. Cedefop, I think about 10 years ago, produced a skills shortage prioritization measure, which used data from the European Skills and Jobs Survey. You now have the new European Skills and Jobs Survey. You have skills of 8, the job line advertisements. And you have an indication from the forecasts about the scale of new job openings over the next 10 years, and you have a future skill shortage indicator. So, there is huge potential to bring all of that data together to provide a level of detail that we haven't had previously, and it seemed to be that Canada was doing something similar. But again, I come back to the supply side. I think we need to have information that lands well with the supply side, and there is information from another Cedefop study which I was involved with about the future of skills, which demonstrated the variety of ways that FEST systems have responded or not, as the case may be, to different external challenges. So I think we need to, when we're developing a lot of these indicators, I think we need to think about how does that information land with the supply side. I think it's vitally important that we have information that gives us a sense of scale in the direction of change, a quantitative assessment, but also we need that detail that I think the supply side can work with. But that's all predicated on whether we can identify a skill shortage in the first place, which is difficult.
Thanks very much. I would like to turn to Ben. In your research, you have a long-standing experience in investigating skills trends and mismatch and comparing also countries when it comes to these skills challenges. So sometimes, I mean, we think that we see a shortage, but there may not really be a shortage, or there may be something going on which is not about skills. Now, I would like to ask you, from your experience, how can we get better at interpreting what we see?
Thanks, Jasper, for the question, and thanks, Terence, for handing over the definition to me. I will jump, as typical economists do, and try to avoid it somewhat. Let's think about it in the way that very often in my work, which is a lot in labor market forecasting and labor market monitoring or labor market information system, I get in contact with firms or with job seekers, and I talk to them, and firms see a huge shortage because they get too few applications. And depending on the type of firm, some get none, and some get only 80 for one position, and both might consider that a shortage. So it's very much the perspective that these firms have. And on the other hand, I sometimes get mails from job seekers that read something that I was involved in, and they talk about that I called something a shortage occupation, while they are still unemployed and they have this qualification or they have worked in this occupation, but they're not being employed. So it's very much also a question of perspective, and it's also not an absolute truth. But what I'm trying usually to do is I'm trying to understand this from the various instruments. So I work a lot with forecasts. I work a lot with longer time series, and I look then at the occupation and qualification level to see how these things are developing together. And many of these individual labor markets, so to speak, or the occupational labor markets, are actually continuously in shortage. And there the question is probably more, how much more shortage is there likely to be, or is there a little less shortage? So you compare it over time and see whether it's improving or it's actually not improving. And another element that you can look at is also across countries, so that it allows you to see whether there are other countries, other labor markets which behave differently.
Thanks, Ben. Very clear. I'd like to come back to Terence and getting a little bit about back to how research can contribute to, let's say, more sensible policy making, in the sense that we become maybe a little bit less myopic and more holistic to respond to skills and labor challenges in the longer term. I mean, you mentioned the supply side. This is a very important part of it. But are there any other ways that you see as important in that respect? You're muted.
Yes.
Sorry. Now it's good.
Okay, fine. Well, as I say, I think we do. I think on the demand side, I think there's a wealth of information that's now there, which I think can be used. Can be brought together to provide some really important insights, which is relevant to policy. But I just go back to this point. I think we just need to think about, if we need to be able to identify the specific shortages that sends a signal to the supply side that this is perhaps where future investments need to be made. Now, I think trying to identify how you respond over the short term is very difficult, because I think to some extent, a skill shortage, an element of a skill shortage is its persistence. So I think if you come up with a measure which just shows suddenly there's a skill shortage, I think there's the risk that you make over hasty decisions which can result in costly wrong turns being making. Plus, you need time to develop the skills. So there are short-term active labour market programs such as skills boot camps, but the amount of skill that they can confer on people in a short space of time is probably quite limited. So you need the skills anticipation element if you really want to deal with skill shortages. But I think there's also a tension in policy, insofar as we want more demand-led training systems, skills systems, that they respond to the signals from the labour market. But at the same time, a lot of the evidence from the forecasts, for example, and other research demonstrates that people will be expected to move more between employers, occupations, sectors in the future, which seems to suggest that skill systems need to be able to provide people with those combination of skills that would give them resilience in the future labour market. Mm-hmm. So the key for the analyst is to be able to identify those more broader based skills, which will afford people a degree of insurance over the next sort of 10, 20 years in their labour market careers. And I think that's what's vitally important. That's what's vitally important. And I think there's a really important role here for which Cedefop's been involved in for very many years, of producing that labour market skills intelligence, that you're informing employers and you're informing individuals about the skills that need to acquire. And that, of course, raises a whole set of issues, which I think is outside the scope of our discussion today, about the mechanisms that you use to support that and how you actually fund it and who bears the cost. But at least you can provide the information to employers and individual workers to say, these are the shortages of the future. This is how you need to prepare yourself to deal with that. So it's rather general, but I think that's
yeah. But nevertheless, very insightful. I'm coming back to Ben, and maybe for a quick answer. I don't know. Quick answers are always difficult, I know, but and so we've seen the possibilities EU level data and analysis can offer in reflecting about shortages. I mean, at this event, but we also see it in other publications and at other institutions. Do you think that we still have some untapped capacity that we could use to expand that analysis and make it even more relevant for policy and practice? I mean, if you had to say a couple of things.
Yes, thank you. Definitely. All of these elements that we've seen today and that have been briefly mentioned are, in my eyes, instruments. So labor market forecast is an instrument, and it's a very good instrument for certain elements, but it's a very blunt instrument for other things. Just as an example, the labor market forecast usually uses qualification, and it totally ignores that there are careers or experiences that people have, and they move from job to job. And it's a difference whether you have a 25-year-old without any experience or a 50-year-old with a lot of experience. So you would want to combine. You would want to use, for example, information from a source like the European Job and Skills Survey to get at least an idea about how these skills are actually accumulating among people in different occupations, what is important, what is not. You might want to use Ovate to see how things are changing. What are people emphasizing when they're actually trying to find people? What are they not emphasizing? So observing these different instruments is quite important. And this is only the data side. What I find even more important is that you interact, you show your results, and you discuss your results. These are not truth. These are just results. These are just numbers with stakeholders, with people that know a sector or an occupation or a qualification quite well, and you take the criticism. You try to understand how the work is actually performed, what skills are used in their opinion, and you try to square these elements. And that's very difficult, but I think it's a very necessary process in order to give good advice to policymakers.
Thanks very much. And with that, I would also like to really thank Terence and Ben for contributing to the panel. We now move to the care sector. And in social care, labor and skill shortages are pressing. And it's obvious that there is a clear link to wages and also working conditions. Now, at the same time, we also see that the sector is transforming because of digital technology and the move towards community-based models, so that transforms the sector and also the delivery of social care. The first question I have is for Sylvain. What type of skill needs do you see emerging as a result of such trends?
Thank you, Jasper, and thank you, Cedefop, for the invitation. You've identified the key skills. They are linked with person-centered care within the community. It means because I guess most of the colleagues don't know well the sector, but to summarize, what is the change of paradigm we face? 20 years ago, when you were discovering a handicap, disability, when we were growing old, independent, you are looking for a place to go to, and that's it. And what was quite, to very simplified, it was one size fits all. Today, the trend is to go towards more community-based services within the community centered on the person needs. It means that concretely, when somebody has a support need, we try to assess his or her situation and try to find the solutions to face the support needs. And then in such conditions, the support which will be provided by workers won't be the same in a residential setting when you can be in charge of 1, 2, 3, 4 tasks, and it will be very different the day when we go to the home of the person you support, and you will have to manage his or her daily life. So it means you have to broaden your skills, and it is challenging because it's not the same conditions. You don't have colleagues with you, you are alone most of the time, and you can face difficult situations, and you have to be a big project manager, and the project is make your supported person live better. So that's very challenging, and it's a big change. With this, we have to go towards new skills linked to digital, because at the headquarters of the organization, you have to have the user's file, you have to have an information system, so that the different support workers who intervene are aware about what happened yesterday, what are the needs in terms of support, of care, of cure, or anything. So we have to have skills at the headquarters, but also the ground level support workers must be aware about how that kind of thing work, because they will have hardware on their phone to report on what happens, and to alarm, on anything like this. So it means you have we need skills to build some information system on one side, and on the other side, you have to build the skills to allow people to use them, and maybe to go further, also to support the supported person in their use of the tools, because some tools are also for them, and that's also the role of a support worker, to train the person we support on this. So it makes, in French we say couteau suisse, it's a multitask persons, and that's a kind of skill which is quite challenging, with a very broad range of skills, from the management of change to medical things, and it's very broad.
Thanks. And for Tuscany, I have a question that's about social dialogue, and you might wonder why social dialogue. Social dialogue, apart from having, let's say, systems and programs, social dialogue is crucial for addressing the skills and training needs of care workers, and also, not only that, also to improve working conditions, which in a way means that it's the factor driving
is now exiting.
That it's a factor that contributes to tackling skill shortages. So at the same time, I mean, research that your organization was involved in shows that in several countries in the EU, social dialogue is not very strong. So if you would have to reflect on what are the main challenges for social dialogues when it comes to the representation of care workers, what would be your main 3 challenges?
Thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. In response to your question, indeed, in the social services sector, there is low level of collective bargaining coverage in almost all EU countries, actually. I think one of the main challenges for representative social dialogue across the EU is that the social services sector is so fast growing. It's actually one of the fastest growing sectors in the EU. Already in 2018, it employed more than 10.9 million people, which was almost 5% of the total EU labour force in 2018. But this figure had increased by 24% in 10 years, which is 5 times more than the EU average. So it's growing incredibly fast, and I'm sure you're all aware of the ageing population and the reasons behind that. But it's also growing in a very decentralized way. So there are different employers, different delivery models, different providers, job classifications, qualifications, not only from country to country, but also within countries and indeed within regions. So this makes it very hard to reach out to all the workers and have a cohesive, unified approach. And then the shift towards home and community-based care as well, which Sylvain has discussed, that makes it very hard to know who the workers are, where they are, indeed what skills they need and what risks they face, because home care workers are often by themselves or in pairs in private residence. And a high proportion of care workers are also migrant workers, so there can be language or cultural barriers in reaching out to them. And a third obstacle in some countries, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, are the legal obstacles to social dialogue. For example, in Hungary, since 2012, collective bargaining for the public sector can only be workplace-based. But at the same time, the working conditions and the wages are set centrally at national or sectoral level. So there's an obstacle there to being able to have social dialogue to improve the conditions. So yeah, they're the three main challenges that I can think of. You're probably also all aware that we now have the EU minimum wage directive that does call for 80% collective bargaining coverage in all countries. So hopefully with that, along with the EU care strategy, we can push for more.
Just before I get back to Sylvain, just one other quick question is about this social dialogue committee in social services that is being set up. I mean, it's an important governance, let's say, approach to dealing with these shortages. How do you see its role in tackling the shortages? I mean, do you have priorities that this body will pursue?
Yep, indeed. So the social partners and EPSU, so Sylvain and I, we made a request in 2021 for an EU sectoral social dialogue committee. And this is a very timely event because we actually expect the result next week or the week after, we hope. So in response to your question, yes, indeed, of course, we will be addressing the skills shortages and the skills need. Job evolution and training needs is on the work programme, and we talk about job evolution and continuous professional development because it's important that the skills and training isn't just for the sake of skills and training, it's matched with career paths and salary increases and professional development. And this is also important for the attractiveness of the sector, which is also on our work programme, so we'll be addressing it indirectly through that. And maybe just as a last additional point going forwards, as social partners, we're also involved in this Care for Skills project, which is one of the large skills partnerships set up in the framework of the European Year of Skills. And on that, we're working in a consortium with user organizations, for example, to develop a blueprint for vocational training for the care sector in digital skills and person-centered skills. So.
Okay, very, very good. I mean, especially the first thing you said about the role of also this information, this intelligence, I think is very important that is part, of your work program. I mean, last question is for Sylvain, and I'd like, of course, you already sketched an image of, a wide range of different skill needs that need to be met. Do you have any good examples of countries where you think they could be role models for others? In the EU, we try to stimulate policy learning, so it's always good to hear about good practices and what we can learn from them.
We know about good practices in many countries across Europe, not only in Nordic countries, a bit everywhere. But I would say if there is a country where we can highlight the high level of advancement of reflection, I would mention the Netherlands, where it is a reflection at national level about skills, because because of staff shortages, they are thinking about training the care workers, but also training their environment, their support person, but informal carers. It means the families, it means the neighbors, and so on. And what do they want to do this? They want to build an integrated care from healthcare to social care with social workers, but also support provided by the neighbors, by all the family who also need some skills, because it's not just because they are volunteer, they're just helping because they care of their beloved. They also need some skills. And we have to match the skills from the workers to the skills of the informal carers. And that's quite interesting. It's quite advanced in terms of reflection. But I must say, all the countries are not in this situation. And in many countries, the training referential, so on, are not yet updated. We still function with the training system we were using some time ago. So big progress is needed. And we about this, we made not a training, but we commissioned a report called Evolving Jobs, Skills and Training Needs in Social Services. And I invite you to read it. It's quite interesting to show. Well, we can see, I say already the conclusions, but we can see that we are not much advanced, but that's what is in front of us for the next years, to build more integrated approaches. Thanks.
Great. I think that as always in these events, that the clock ticks, even faster than it normally does. So we're quite close to the closing. I would like to thank you all panelists for taking part in this panel. I think it was a very interesting discussion. So we have also come to the end of this second virtual get-together. I think it showed us broadly three things. The first thing is that as experts, policymakers, but also practitioners, I think we need to have awareness that, alongside skills, which in many cases are an issue, there are also many other factors that explain why we see shortages in the labor market. And a second conclusion that I would make is that and that's actually a quite positive message, is that via research and analysis that not only Cedefop but also other organizations do, we have opportunities to dig deeper into the causes of shortages. And I think that work can really have potential to make our skills and skills matching policies more evidence-based. Okay. My computer is giving me a message, but let's ignore it. So, and third, I would also like to conclude that forward-looking evidence on labor market trends, I mean, COPs in Canada, but in Cedefop we call it skills intelligence. I think it became very clear from the discussions that it's really a strategic and practical resource that helps us see bottlenecks and problems ahead before they occur. And I think in the year of skills, of course, it's very good to make that point that we cannot do without it, that we really need it. In the decade of up and reskilling that we will have, let's say up until 2035, skills intelligence will play that role of guiding us the way. So that closes this seminar. And I would like to close by thanking our speakers, our panelists, my colleagues at Cedefop working behind the scenes, and of course you, the participants. You will find in the chat a link to a short evaluation form, and we would really appreciate if you would take a minute to fill it out. As I said at the start, more virtual get-togethers will follow in the coming months. Please stay tuned to Cedefop social media for all the details. Thanks again very much. That's it from me. Thanks for being with Cedefop today and have a nice rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.